This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of When Science Speaks. This is Mark Bayer, and I am so glad that you are here. Today's episode is brought to you by Bayer Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and engineers get funding, advance their careers, and build strategic relationships with the stakeholders who matter most. I am just so glad to have Dr. Jovana Milosavljevic-Ardeljan with us today on the show today. Jovana is a scholar from Serbia who came to the U.S. in 2014 to pursue a master's degree in linguistics and stayed for her Ph.D. in education, specializing in higher education leadership and policy studies. She's presented and published research on communication skill development for graduate students and postdocs that supports career diversified pathways. Her research is informed by her professional role in the Graduate School of the University of New Hampshire, where she develops and delivers graduate student professional development programs focused on the importance of effective written and oral communications to translate advanced research into meaningful real-world applications. Over the past 5 years, Jovana has created a robust suite of enrichment programming, including writing retreats and annual 3-minute thesis competition, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, as well as programs covering such topics as mentorship, mental health, and hiring processes in and outside of academia, and other related important issues. Jovana is a strong advocate for improving graduate education and offering enhanced support to graduate students, especially in the areas of communication skill development, dissertation and thesis writing, career development, and diversification. It is so great to have you here. Thank you for joining us, Jovana.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Mark. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, you're an expert on communicating complex topics in relatable, engaging terms that are accessible to general audiences. And in fact, your PhD thesis focused on the structure of existing communication support programs and doctoral student and graduate school leaders' perspectives on these programs. We had a chance to talk offline, and you noted that communication skills and their importance is really downplayed right now in PhD programs, for example. Why do you think that is?
I really think there are several reasons for that. First of all, I think they're taken for granted. It's just something that we do every day. It's part of our daily lives, no matter what we do. And I guess it's perceived as something that we just do without thinking much about it. But what I think is really important to emphasize here is that being able to communicate does not equal being able to communicate effectively.
Right.
And that's what we need to put more emphasis on. As we know, traditional graduate education is really focused on academia, especially if we talk about PhD students. They are trained to stay in academia, pursue teaching and research positions. And that's really, we can see that in communication training as well. Students are experts in communicating what they do within their field, so to their advisors, to their peers, within their academic communities, in examples like conference presentations and conference talks. But when it comes to communicating to a much wider audience, students really don't have a chance to do that very much. And even if they do have a chance, it's challenging, it's really hard, and they don't get the training for that. It's hard to teach these skills. I just recently finished reading this book, Why They Can't Write, by John Werner. And he speaks very well about how challenging it is with college students to teach them how to write. If we take that's to start with that premise that undergraduate students have challenges with writing and oral communication, it's really logical to conclude that graduate students have the same challenges. But somehow we assume that just being in graduate school, they already have all those communication skills and we don't need to teach them. But it's really not true. We need to put more support in graduate education to help students learn to communicate their work to different audiences, because they'll just be better prepared, not just for jobs outside of academia. I'll argue that they will be better prepared for jobs in academia, because they'll have to teach undergraduate students who are equally non-experts,
Right.
just starting their studies. They really are not experts in any field.
So important.
Yeah.
I mean, you underlined a couple of things that I just wanted to highlight. First of all, the distinction between being able to write and being able to write well. There's a big gap there. What does that look like in this translation ability? And the other thing that you noted about the difficulty, I mean, it is hard to really translate complex topics in ways that are accessible to general audiences. The saying about, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. It really does take time to distill those things and figure out the best way to do that. And then also making the point that it's not just important for training outside academia. It's for really key inside. If you decide to pursue a career inside academia when you're teaching students, like as you pointed out, undergraduate students, for example, and
Absolutely.
you need to talk to them in a way that they can understand. So it really gets into my next question, which are the consequences of underdeveloped communication skills in various settings.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I really think we need to do more research on communication skills and how they benefit students, graduate students particularly. That's my focus of interest, but it can be applied in different areas as well. I look at this problem particularly in terms of how communication skills can help graduate students diversify their career options, and what are the consequences of not doing that. So one of the consequences that I would start with is that we just niche students in particular field and help them be experts in whatever their subject matter is. That's just really problematic, especially nowadays, because we know there are not enough careers in academia. There are not enough tenure track positions for students to pursue. Even if they want to, they can't, because there just aren't enough. But we should not forget that not everybody wants to stay in academia. So we are really not doing them any service if we don't invest in helping them communicate their work to diverse stakeholders. By being able to translate their work to people in different careers, they're really preparing themselves to take positions that are outside of academia. I know there's an argument among some academics who would say, well, it's not supposed to be understood by everyone. It's very specialized, and I do understand that point. But I don't think any of our work is done in isolation. Nobody is in their own bubble. We are all very connected. And I would argue that taxpayers really deserve to understand what is being done in academia. There are different settings where we will communicate differently, and that's something that I always emphasize. I'm not advocating for just preparing students to communicate to general audience and forcing them to be able to dilute their work. It's not about diluting anybody's work. It's just being able to differently communicate to different audiences and doing that effectively. They will still have to talk to other scientists, and they can do that very well now, I think. But giving them opportunity to learn to communicate to different audiences is only benefiting them, and not taking away from what they already do in any way. And that's just not something I advocate for.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point on a number of levels. I mean, one, of course, is, anyone who thinks that not communicating to a broader audience is really something that is okay, should basically just look at COVID as the huge use case as to why that's a fallacious argument. I mean, there's so many topics that just need to be communicated to the general public. And of course, the other thing you touched upon as well is, who is funding this research? You say, well, it's important for the taxpayers to know. Of course, policymakers make decisions about funding all the time. And if you're not equipped to do that, then, you're at a disadvantage when it comes to getting funding for your research. This is obviously something I've spent a lot of time on and working with scientists to do.
No, I really appreciate the work that you do, and I think it's really, really important. I'm glad to see at my university more and more students are interested in learning how to communicate to policymakers and how to connect with them better. Part of that whole strategy is, you mentioned earlier, 3-minute thesis. We now include trustees in our 3-minute thesis and have them be judges because we want to give them opportunity to see the work that we do at the University of New Hampshire. And 3-minute thesis, the format of 3-minute thesis really allows for those people to understand the work that we do. So I do see more of those opportunities, but I don't see them on a national level in a way that is really strategic and systematic, and in part of the curriculum. It's more on in these pockets and related to people who see the value in this. So just bringing it to a higher level, I think, is really important.
I want to talk about your work teaching English as a second language in your home country. We noted that's Serbia. And I would love for you to share with listeners how that experience of teaching English as a second language informs your current work at UNH.
Yeah, so for 6 years, I used to teach English as a second language, as you noted, in Serbia. And one of the most important things for me was to keep in mind who my audience is and what do they come in with to my classroom. Every textbook that I had available to use in courses, I would look at the topics that are covered, and inevitably there was always skiing somehow. That's really a topic that you can't miss. And I thought about it, and it's just really hard when you're learning a language, there are so many things that are happening in your mind at the same time. You need to pay attention to grammar, you need to pay attention to articles, word order, which is not the same between languages. And you add on top of that to think about what you're going to say in the first place. It's really a lot to keep in mind, and you're trying to learn the language at the same time. So skiing is really not a thing in Serbia. It's not many people go skiing. It's what is more popular is going to the seaside and summer vacations. That's something that I think anybody can relate to. So I would often change the topic and really use the topics that my students can relate to, that they can use examples from their own lives. So at least they didn't have to think about that. What I do right now really relates a lot to that. I want to help students find ways to relate to their audience, anticipate what their audience will be able to connect to, find the ways to communicate it in a meaningful way that's really easy to understand, avoiding jargon. That's one of the things you do when you teach language as well. You have to be very mindful of your vocabulary. If you're teaching beginners class, you're not going to use advanced language, obviously. You're just going to choose your words. And this is pretty much the same concept that I'm applying now in helping students learn to communicate effectively. You have to be mindful of your vocabulary and avoid what you're just really used to. A lot of abbreviations, a lot of jargon that's very specific to the field. And that becomes really our second nature because we just do it so often. We write about it, we talk about it within our cohort or with our advisors or our colleagues in the field, and we just forget that that's not everybody's common language. It's not just something that everybody understands. And that's just so easy to forget. We just have to constantly remind ourselves of that.
Yes, and that example of skiing versus going to the beach is just so wonderful because, as you underscored in that response, relatability really important. So many new things that the students are learning, and then to throw this other experience on top of it that they're not familiar with would make it even that much harder and get people wondering, like, sort of, how does this whole course relate to me? You're talking about things that I don't even do or understand or have any kind of personal experience with. So that's just great. It's a great way of exemplifying what we all should be thinking about when we're talking to an audience. And, I want to transition here to another topic that's so important to our audience. And you've really been a leader in this area. You created a 3-part series on mentor-mentee relationships. And so many of our listeners are looking for those kind of productive relationships or in relationships right now that may or may not be working out as well as they had hoped. And if you could share with us what, some of the common themes and learnings that you have, uncovered as part of your work here, I know that would be really helpful for listeners.
Yeah, mentor-mentee relationships are really a big topic right now, for a good reason, I think. So the 3-part mentorship series you mentioned, it was last semester that I created that, and I wanted to give 3 perspectives on mentorship. So the first session was with mentors who have received graduate faculty mentor awards at UNH, University of New Hampshire, and I had them talk about mentorship from their perspective. What does it mean to be a good mentor? What does it mean to be a good mentee? And how they perceived it. Then the second one was from the perspective of students, and I invited some students to be on a panel and talk about their experiences, both positive and negative, with their mentors, and what in their mind was a good mentor and how it would help them in their programs. And finally, I had Assistant Dean from graduate school who works with students, especially when it comes to point that there are difficult relationships with mentors, and maybe students are thinking about changing their advisor or even leaving their program. So Assistant Dean has really good, I think, additional perspective of how this relationship can be problematic and how it can be navigated and repaired. So an interesting thing for me from all 3 events was that everybody emphasized how communication was the key to successful and good relationship, not just to build a good relationship, but even to repair one if it has come to that point. And there was a great example from one of the students from the student panel. She talked about her experience as a hall director when she was in her undergraduate program. And she talked about the training she received for that role and how they specifically learned how to use language, how to use I statements, how to de-escalate difficult situations. And that was just really fascinating to me, how much potential there is to build great and positive and good relationships if we just invested a little bit more in helping students learn how to communicate better. I think big part there is that students will be better prepared to advocate for themselves, which will serve them in many areas, not just in a relationship with their mentors. I think this is particularly important for international students. Coming from a different culture myself, I had to learn a new way of communicating with my advisor. Is just something that was new to me coming into this culture, and that was just basically my own initiative. There was nothing that was sort of created and provided to me, and I don't think that's a good approach. I don't mean to say that mentors are not good or that they are not doing a good job. I really think we need to provide support to mentors and help them learn to be good mentors. It's just there are so many expectations from them and there is no support. So I have nothing but sympathy and gratitude for the work that they do. I really truly believe they're doing their best, and given all the expectations and the pressures that they're under, I just really think there should be support for both mentors and mentees, and help them learn how to be better at what they do and how to communicate better. I'll just add over here another example from my master thesis, which was about metacognitive awareness of instructions that we get. And a specific example is the word analyze. That's really common across languages. It's same in many languages. The interesting thing that I found in interviews that I did with both professors and students is that pretty much everybody had different interpretation of what it meant to analyze something. And that was just fascinating to me, how we can rely on our own interpretations and our own understanding of communication, and often blame the other part, thinking you're just not doing what I'm telling you to do. And we don't stop for a second to make sure we are on the same page and we understand each other. So those are just some things that I think about a lot when I create these mentorship programs, hoping to help both students and mentors build those those relationships.
So important, Jovana. Thank you for that. And just one thing that you said about the I statements, for listeners who aren't that familiar, maybe you could give a quick example of that. But that's such an important, that's just one small tactic, but so important. Yeah. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Absolutely. So when we are in difficult situations or relationships, it's really easy to say, you did this or you did that. Instead, we should really reframe it and put ourselves in the center and say, I feel like this when something like this happens. I feel like you are not appreciating my efforts when you send me multiple emails, asking for results. Mm-hmm. I'm just giving one example that could be a possible situation for graduate students. So really explaining your experience, explaining what you feel is really important, and not putting the blame on anybody else. That's just one of the strategies to not even make the situation worse or make the relationship worse, which can easily happen if we start to use the language that can be perceived as blaming the other side. So those I statements can be really, really helpful in those kind of situations.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thanks for teasing that out. The first round for the 3-minute thesis, we talked a little bit about that at the beginning. That first round was the end of March. That happened. And then we're going to see the Northeast U.S. and Canada regional competition coming up this month in April. What can you tell us about 3MT? And, for listeners who are working on their own theses right now, how could they perhaps maybe benefit, whether it's even secondhand, get some insights from the 3MT process that you're right in the middle of?
Yeah, so 3-minute thesis is really one of my favorite programs. I absolutely love it. Just to give the listeners' perspective of what 3-minute thesis is, in case they're not familiar. It's a concept that comes from the University of Queensland. It was created over there, and there's really an interesting story behind it, how they came up with the 3-minute thesis concept. The provost at the time was taking a shower, actually, and it was at the time when there was a drought in Australia, and everybody had pretty much 3 minutes to take a shower. So he was thinking about what else can you do in 3-minute thesis in 3 minutes, and this is where the concept came up. Like, how can you communicate your thesis in just 3 minutes?
I love it.
And so they started doing that work, and now it's being done at about 900 universities in the world. So students have 3 minutes or less to communicate their work in non-jargon language. So really anybody should be able to understand it. They can only use one static slide, so no animations, no sound. They can't sing or dance. They just have to talk, and that's it. I think it's a beautiful concept. The point of 3-minute thesis is explaining what you do and why it matters. Why it matters to everybody. So really, you have to do a good job to help your audience relate to your work. So for anyone who might be having second thoughts, I really think you can gain a lot out of this experience. And I'm not saying this just as an organizer of 3-minute thesis, but also as a former participant. So I really do understand the challenges of doing 3-minute thesis. I did it a couple of times. I did win it, but it did take me two tries. It is difficult work, but it's really helpful in terms of preparing you to communicate your work to different audiences, as I've been mentioning several times now. If you're at an early stage of your work, it really helps you focus and narrow down what you do. It really forces you to focus and have a good grasp of your work. So doing it at early stage, I think, is just as valuable as doing it at a later stage when you already have all the results. Once it forces you to let go of the technical details that may be important to those in your field, but not crucial for general audience. Students will develop new way of thinking about their audience and relating to their audience, and really finding a way to get people interested and excited about the work that they do, and help them realize why it's important that they keep doing this work. And in relation to policymakers, help them decide to fund projects and research. Finally, students have opportunity to practice presentation skills in a different setting that really isn't always readily available to everybody, but can be very much used in career development. I've heard from so many students that they've used their 3-minute thesis talk in job talks, in campus visits. I know I posted mine on LinkedIn, and it just went viral. It was shared and commented, and it reached people that otherwise I don't think I would ever reach. And I know our students do that, and we encourage them to do that. It really gives you opportunity with your job application to submit your short video and see it. And I've heard from several students that before, when they went into the interview, somebody made comments, I watched your 3-minute thesis and I really enjoyed it. So I really think students can really benefit from it. But to just go away from students for a second, the whole concept, I think, is very valuable to anybody in any setting. Being able to quickly and clearly communicate your work, what you do and why it matters, is something that can be applied anywhere, both in academia and in business and in industry. So just the overall concept, I know it's called 3-minute thesis and really much related to academia, but it can be used anywhere.
It's wonderful. So important. Thanks for giving us that information on that, Jovana. And as we wrap up this interview, which has been just so illuminating, and really thank you for sharing your insights. I'm wondering if you have maybe a thought about perhaps one thing listeners could do right after listening to the show, of course, that would improve their communication skills.
One thing is definitely keeping in mind who your audience is. It is so important. You have to meet your audience where they are. I really think it's the speaker's responsibility to adjust the way they talk or the way they write based on who their audience is. I think there's some sort of ego issue when we have to make those changes, and we might want to say, well, you should go read a book and then you understand what I'm talking about or what I'm writing about. But I really don't think that's the point. We have to be able to keep our audience in mind and adjust the way we communicate. So that's just really one thing that I would emphasize. And if I may just add one more thing, use the opportunities that are out there for you to improve your communication skills. There are more and more of those opportunities, both within academia and outside. I really appreciate the work that you do, Mark. I really admire the work of Alan Alda's Center for Science Communication. I think they're doing a wonderful job. So to students, to graduate students, I would really encourage them to see what they have at their universities and use those opportunities. I know sometimes we may think it's taking away from our research and it's never enough time to do it, but this will only help you advance and progress, and which will really not take away from your work in any way.
Wonderful. Jovana, thank you for joining us. This was just really an enjoyable episode and conversation, and I'm looking forward. I'm excited and honored to be a guest, or I guess a judge, for this upcoming next round of 3-minute thesis, and really learn firsthand what the students and how the students are presenting their information. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited and looking forward to that. And the work that you're doing is so critical on a number of fronts. The mentor-mentee relationship, the communication skills, and you bringing this depth of both academic and practical knowledge to that relationship, and the fact that, English wasn't your first language. And, for many people, science is their first language, and now they have to sort of learn how to translate into a different way. And I'm sure you bring a lot of empathy as well as the expertise to that kind of instruction. So thank you for doing what you do every day.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Mark. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm so looking forward to having you be one of the judges for our finals, for the 3 thesis finals. I think it's going to be a great experience for you, and really wonderful for us to have somebody with your expertise come and give some feedback to students. I think they'll have opportunity to learn so much from you. Well, so really, thank you so much for this opportunity to share my thoughts on communication.
Great. Thanks for that. And listeners, thank you so much for being along on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope you'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.